Hey guys, Andy here, and today we have another little ranking video. I had to think of what it was called. This was first done by It's Just Steph. As always, I get these videos from other people. I will have her listed in the description box down below. This is a video where you're taking any brand that you have 3 or more palettes from, and if somebody broke into your house and said you have to declutter 1 palette from every brand, what palette would you declutter? So I have 9 brands here next to me, and I have the palettes that I would be decluttering, and we're just gonna go through them. And I ranked them as well. This should generally would be 2 separate videos, but I figured what's the point of making them 2 separate videos? So I'm going to show you the palettes, and we're going to rank them all into one big thing. As always, the makeup that is on my face is one of the palettes in this video, because I do love these palettes. They're in my collection, but everything that's on my face will be listed in the description box. And if you like makeup unboxings with a little bit of horror sprinkled in, please consider subscribing, as I would love to have you here. Let's just go ahead and get into today's video. Alright, to start off, we are starting off strong. So we're starting off strong. If you know, you know. Palette number 9 for me is the Natasha Denona Pastel palette. Out of all my Natasha Denona palettes, this one is my least favorite, and I've thought about decluttering it. I've gone back and forth on it, but this is the color story. It's a beautiful color story. I love this chartreusey green, this like peachy orange. For me, the mattes in this palette are just not good. I don't think that they're very blendable. I don't think that they're very pigmented. This like cream to matte formula that she uses, I don't like it. But the shimmers in this palette are great. I love the shimmers. So it's just, do I want to keep it just for the shimmers and try to make the mattes work? I don't have any other midi-sized palettes, because my original thought was, oh, because I know you can depot these, but I don't have any other midi-sized palettes yet. So for now, it sits in my collection. Eventually, maybe it'll go away, but for now, this is ranking number 9. This palette, I have a love-hate relationship with it, but here we are. That is number 9. For number 8, this is the Profusion Matcha Milk Tea. This is what this palette looks like. It's just a little 6-pan. So I have some qualms with this palette. Number 1, so in all of the other palettes, they were a concise color story, which is, so like the purple palette was all purples. The orange was all oranges. Why does the green palette have a nude? And I understand that this is a greeny gold, but this is still a champagne-y gold. And why do we have a neutral? This should be all greens. That bothers me, because all of the other color stories in this like tea collection were monochromatic. The other thing that bothers me is the only other matte is this green, whereas the other palettes have 3 mattes. This marbled green shimmer is just garbage. It's not very good. And like the whole reason that I keep this palette is for this duochrome, which I will swatch for you. Which is this, and that's not even very good anymore. Like, that's not even, does this have hard pan already? There we go. I really had to get in there to swatch that. Yeah, it like already has hard pan. I am pressing. It looks much better on my finger than it's going on for the swatch, so I think I might actually declutter this palette. It's not that great of a color story, in my opinion. There are better palettes out there. They're better, like, you guys know how much I love Profusion palettes and love their formula, but this one, and I have the purple one, which I love, but this one just, I think I might actually go ahead and declutter this. That was not the point of this video. but here we are. And spot number 7 is from Jeffree Star. If I had to declutter one of his palettes, for me it would be the Blood Sugar palette. This palette was so disappointing. When you look at it in the red packaging, it looks like such a red palette, but I have it in the white packaging. Look how neutral this is. Why do we have all of these neutrals in a red palette? These couple reds aren't even that bright of red. They're more terracotta bricky shades. You have this really nice purple. You have the pink. That's great. But this is a neutral palette with a little bit of pop of pink and red. So, and like, it's a fine formula, but compared to his newer palettes, this just feels like a slightly outdated formula. It's not as good. The mattes aren't as blendable. They're slightly patchy. So that mixed with the color story, this palette was just super disappointing. It just wasn't worth the hype, which was super upsetting for me. I still keep it because, like, I paid money for it and I wanted it, but it was not what I had hoped it would be. And that's so upsetting. And spot number 6, if you know, you know, I've ragged on this palette too. This is my ColourPop Fade into Hue palette. Now, this half of the palette, wonderful, beautiful, love it so much. But for some reason, this half of the palette just does not perform very well for me. The mattes are kind of patchy. They really take a lot of building and they don't blend very well. And then this column, the blue column specifically, is almost unusable. My shimmer, the Hot Copic shade, is hard panned. Let me see if I can get a swatch for you. It was hard panned when I got the palette. And I've had people tell me this is their favorite shade in the palette. And mine just is lackluster and barely swatches. And I've done the tape trick. I've done, like, that's not giving shimmery goodness. Like, it's giving chunky, icky. Like, the blue mattes are okay, but it's just not giving. I do like the blue glitter. I love ColourPop's pressed glitter formula. I think it's great. But just that half of the palette does not perform well. And I don't know if I just got a dud, but I digress. Now we're moving into the next 2 palettes the next 3 palettes are fine. They're just fine. They're in the fine category for me. But, you know, if I had to declutter one palette from every brand, these are the palettes that made that list. In spot number 5, we have the Cara Beauty Yummy in My Tummy palette. And I love the names. They're all little puns. It's a beautiful color story, but again, the mattes in here, I believe this is an older palette. I got this from TJ Maxx, so, you know, you never know how long TJ Maxx had this before I bought it. But the mattes are just kind of patchy. They're not the easiest to blend. You really have to pack them on. But the shimmers are beautiful. Like, you can get a look out of it, but compared to all of my other Cara Beauty palettes that are just so easy to use and beautiful, this just doesn't hit that mark for me. Number 4 is Makeup Revolution. This is the Chilled palette. This is actually my very first Makeup Revolution palette. So there's a couple things for this one. One, it has 2 pressed glitters, and I love pressed glitters. I do. But Makeup Revolution has an awful pressed glitter formula. Like, these are just, they're scratchy, and they're scratchy on the eyes. And I don't like that. Even with a glitter glue, like, you can feel the texture of them on your eyes. So I do not like using the pressed glitters in the palette. And my issue is there's just so many different formulas in here. Some of these mattes perform beautifully. Some of these mattes are patchy. Some of these shimmers, like, let's do this gold shade Acapulco. Like, it's more like a translucent topper shade, but it's beautiful, right? But it's a topper. Then you have the shade next to it, Calm, which is a totally different formula. Like, it feels different in the pan. Then let's go into the shade Candyland, which feels like a normal shimmer. And it's just like, those are 3 different formulas in the same palette. But like that's not anywhere advertised on. It wasn't on the outer box packaging. It's not anywhere on the palette here. Like, it just says these first two are pressed glitters. And it doesn't even say that this Bud shade is a pressed glitter, but it is. 110%. So, that's my issues with this. I do really like these tin packaging palettes. They're my favorite eyeshadow formula from Makeup Revolution. But I've had this palette for a couple years now, and it just, you can tell. In spot number 3, we have from Violet Voss. This is the Essentials 2 palette. And for me, it's the color story. I'm not a huge fan of neutrals, so that's why this ranked where it is. And my other Violet Voss palettes, I like the color stories more, which is why this is the one I'm decluttering. This is a beautiful formula, and I like this palette. But these two purples, so we have Wild Orchid. So on the finger, they do look quite different. But, and swatched out, you're going to be like, Andy, those are different. But on the eyes, I'm telling you, they look exactly the same. Like, we did not need both of those tones in the palette. Like, I wish one of those would have been, and like, I see what they went for, because with the blues, you have a matte blue, and then you have a shimmer blue. And this one is like kind of in between, because this is the shimmer purple, but this isn't quite a shimmer, but it's not quite a matte either. But it's not a sequin. It's a very weird formula. But the mattes are beautiful. It's just these purples are redundant, and I don't like that. But other than that, like, it was just the color story on why this palette made the ranking. For spot number 2, which I love both of these palettes. These two palettes are great. It's just, again, had to pick one. In spot number 2, we have the Milani Most Loved Mattes. All matte palette, but this is the color story. Again, this formula is phenomenal. I just have a different all matte palette that if I was going to only keep one all matte palette, it would be that one, which is the Lash Step Matte About You. You guys know I've raved about that matte palette. It's just got a few more colors than this. It's got a white and a black, where I feel like this is a little more limiting. But like, I love Milani's formula, and this is a great palette. And this has the more pinks and oranges. So I do think it's really a good palette. And my other Milani palettes, I think, they have shimmers. All of my other ones have shimmers. So if I was going to declutter one, it would be this one. But this is a really great formula. So if you like this color story or you like all matte palettes, I highly recommend it. It's phenomenal. I just would keep the Lash Step palette over this one. And the palette that is on my eyes today, which is our number 1 spot, which makes me so sad that I would have to declutter this. Like, this would be the only palette, like, the rest of those, if a robber broke into my house and was like, give me one palette from every brand that you have 3 or more palettes from. That's a very specific robber situation. But if that happened, and they took all 8 of those palettes, I would not be that upset. I would just be like, that's very specific of you, but fine, give me a moment to collect them. And I would give them all of those palettes. I would vlog about it, but I would give them all of those palettes. But I'd be upset about this one. Like, I would have to go repurchase this palette if a robber came and took this one. And this is what's on my eyes today. This is the ABH Riviera palette. I did a palette bingo today, so I used Estate, which is basically my skin tone. It blended all over my eye. Monte Carlo is the matte shade all over. And then I used the shimmers Mediterranean, Seaside, and Seychelles. It was beautiful. Like, the mattes are a little powdery, but like, they blend like a dream. The shimmers feel like Super Shock shadows. The color story is beautiful. I could have lived without a matte white, but I don't care. It's fine. This is just wonderful. Like, I would genuinely be upset if I did not have this palette. It's so good. And like I said, like, look at my look. I do have a loose shadow on my inner corner from Pretties for Your Face, but other than that, everything else is this palette. And it's... Please don't take this palette away from me. It's mine. Leave it alone. But the other 8, like, I would be upset because Mr. Robert, like, I paid for these palettes. Please don't take them. But I wouldn't repurchase any of those 8 palettes. Like, if somebody took those 8, I would just cut my losses and be like, oh well, you live and you learn. But I would have to re-get this one. Again, it's just Steph made this first. Again, I will leave her tag down in the description box. Let me know if you guys decide to do this tag. I would love to watch your videos. What palettes would you declutter? Would any of these have made your list? Are any of these your favorite palette? Please let me know in the comments. I love to talk to you guys there. And as always, I will see you in the next one. Bye, guys.